Hey everybody, this episode of Artists Decoded is brought to you in part by No Wave Academy. No Wave Academy provides online instructional workshops from some of today's best fine artists. Some of the artists include Mia Bergeron, Paul Christina, Nick Runke, Daniel Seagrove, John Wentz, and many more. A lot of these artists have actually been featured on Artists Decoded as well, so definitely go check out the archive to check those out. The Academy recently released an oil painting from life workshop with master oil painter Sean Cheetham. Artists Decoded is offering 10% off of all of their online workshops, so please go to nowaveacademy.com, type in AD-10 at checkout for 10% off. Now, on to the episode.
Photography for me is a meditative process. It's one of the few things outside of just genuine meditation that allows me to be completely present, where I don't have the baggage of my past and my anxiety about the future perpetually in my thoughts. When I go out and I make photographs, particularly if I'm making a portrait, it's all about me being in that moment and not really putting any expectations on it. It's looking at everything that's in front of me, the light, the shadow, the line, the shape, the color, gesture, and seeing how I can wrangle all that within the context of the frame and make something that's more than the sum of its parts.
Hey everybody, this is your host Yoshino, and welcome to Artists Decoded. This is episode number 153, and in this episode, I get the opportunity to talk to fellow photographer and writer Ibarionex Perello. He's also the host of the Candid Frame photography podcast, which he started in 2006. He's had hundreds of conversations from some of the best photographers from around the world, including Eli Reed, Maisel, Dan Winters, Keith Carter, Joel Meyerowitz, and many more. Ibarionex has also written hundreds of magazine articles on the subject of photography. He's also written half a dozen books on the subject as well. His most recent book is Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow. I'll be posting some of his work on our new website, artistdecoded.com, or you can go to his personal website, ibarionex.net. So here it is, my conversation with Ibarionex Perello for Artists Decoded. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for being a part of Artists Decoded and being a guest on the show.
Hey, my pleasure, man. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah. You're a really good interviewer.
Thanks. I get a lot of practice.
Yeah. Do you, so one of my favorite podcasts is The Treatment with Elvis
Oh,
Mitchell.
yeah. Elvis is, yeah. He's one of my people I kind of model myself after, of several people, but Elvis is incredible because he knows so much about film, but he's also very curious, and he knows, because he's informed and because he likes to listen, he asks the most adept questions. Always really insightful. He makes me want to watch movies that I otherwise would never want to watch.
Oh, no, definitely. So I was listening to his interview with Tyler, the Creator.
Okay.
And Tyler, the Creator, was talking about how he loves the film Good Burger.
Really? Okay.
And I was like, Good Burger? Like, why? Okay. Because first of all, I've never seen Good Burger, but, growing up as a kid and that sort of like Nickelodeon generation,
right.
I know who they are, but, just like watching films that you would never want to watch, it kind of piqued my interest, and I looked up the trailer to Good Burger.
Right.
Yeah. And I was like, that's interesting. But I think Elvis, I also study Elvis, like the way that he interviews people and the way that he can string together people's work and then make realizations, kind of like cathartic realizations for like why an actor chooses certain roles and things like that. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I think that's something I strive to do. And I think it's really based on having not only a knowledge of the medium, in this case with Elvis, film and television, Yeah, I think what makes Elvis such an adept interviewer is not just because he knows so much about film and television and entertainment, period, but he has a good understanding of what it means to be creative and what it means to be human, that it allows him to go beyond the sort of myopic question and answer that you typically see on practically any other program, much less radio or podcasting, where people are just have a set of questions, expect an answer, and then they sort of move on. They're not really looking for having a conversation where we can have revelatory insights, as they are just looking for quotes and comments to fill time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of a microcosm for just humanity in general.
Yeah.
Trying to do things that are kind of filler or, not very conscious actions in general. And also just like him as an interviewer, I think is so rare because he is so insightful and introspective, but also makes it about the guests as well.
Right.
And he's able to tie all of these sort of nuanced things about just humanity and perspective in such an eloquent way. And I could listen to him talk about slicing bread, but the way that he would say it, it's kind of like, like a good artist or a good author, they can, like a good painter can paint this boring still life and it'll just look incredible.
Yeah, I think there's so much stuff that's out there that's just the equivalent of filler. It's like fast food. You eat it because you're hungry, but then it's just there. And then you get a really good meal and you really want to savor it. And I think guys like Elvis, Terry Gross, just a lot of other people get that. And I think that people are all they're very hungry for something substantive, whether, even if it's not podcasting, just for something. But we live in a culture that is so focused on just distraction. I think the majority of people have been conditioned to not think about what they're consuming, the quality of what they're consuming, because it's just there to distract. And then once you have a taste for something that is a lot more enriching, spiritually, creatively, once you get a taste of that, when you go back to the other stuff, you immediately know that what you see what that other stuff is. And if you're of a mind to want that kind of nurturing for yourself, you'll tend to gravitate towards that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I 100% agree. So I'm curious, like, where did so I kind of wanted to take this back, like all the way back. When you were a kid, were you an extremely curious person?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, obnoxiously so. I remember the fire department, the firehouse, opened up across the street from where I was going to school, St. Columkill School down in South LA. And, the fireman was giving us a tour, and I kept asking these questions, and my teacher was like, quiet already, because I was the only one asking questions. And I was a bookworm. I wasn't athletic at all, so I found my second home in the library. So I was always cracking through books, reading about, biology, astronomy, just anything. It seemed like school for me, at least the things that I was learning in school were never completely enough for me. And I was always fascinated by other things. I remember we would go to like an old thrift store that I think was on maybe like 34th and Avalon or something like that. And I got my mom to buy me these old history books. They were probably school books that ended in the 60s, probably in the 60s. And I remember just going through those books and just reading history just because it kind of interested me. So, yeah, I always had questions, not that I always got answers.
Being so curious and introspective, do you feel that, as you've gotten deeper into photography, do you feel like you're more in tune with those sort of cerebral elements of the photography or the observational elements, or, as you're getting older, are you able to mold the observation and the cerebral into one more eloquently?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think that if anything, I'm trying to take the cerebral out. I think that for me, I've gotten to the point where, technically speaking, I've had a good grasp of the mechanics of making a photograph, of composition, of color, light, processing an image in post. And what I'm trying to get to is a more spontaneous, intimate, almost childlike place that I had when I was younger. And I think that happens with most people, especially when they're kids. Whether it was drawing, whether it was singing, you just do it spontaneously without having any knowledge of the mechanics of how to do it, quote unquote, right. Mm-hmm. And then you start learning the traditional principles of whatever art form there is. Mm-hmm. And then you get immersed in that. And you learn how to do things right and how to think, what's wrong. And then you get to a point where you know enough, and there's a divergent road. You become either the person who becomes obsessively technical, or it's all about the technique, refining the technique, getting it perfect. And there are other people that go, oh, I know enough, and I'm just going to do it. And I'm trying to be more the latter than the former.
Definitely.
Because I find for me that the more obsessed I've became technical, the less I don't want to say creative, but the less adventuresome I became. Mm-hmm. Because I was thinking within the confines of what's acceptable, and now I'm just more willing to just take risks, embrace failure, embrace discomfort, go down a path where I really don't know what the outcome is going to be, just to see what happens.
Yeah.
Because those surprises are the places where you can really experience not only some sort of new discovery, but also you get to discover something that you never could have gotten to otherwise. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just shoot blind. I'll just have the camera. I won't even look for the viewfinder. I'll just jet it out at something sort of interesting. And just, even though I know, hey, might be slightly blurry, it's going to be off kilter, blah, blah, blah. And for me, it doesn't care. It's just, I just want to see how it looks like when I'm giving up that kind of control. Because something I'll look at a picture and I'll go, ooh, that's something I wouldn't have made if I just brought the camera up to my eye. Mm-hmm. But that's something I want to consider the next time I'm shooting, that maybe I can just make a slightly different choice or wait for a moment that isn't the peak moment. Mm-hmm. Everyone quotes Henri Cartier-Bresson in terms of the decisive moment, which is great. And I think I've become pretty adept at sort of that, being able to capture such moments. But I'm kind of curious about, what happens when that moment is sort of waning down or ramping up? Is there a photograph in there? Is it just strictly that one moment that's worthy of a photograph? And I don't want to be a slave to what other people have said, that this is the only moment that we can capture, because I think it whether or not it's the case, you just eliminate a lot of possibilities. And I don't think that creativity is supposed to be about limiting yourself.
I mean, everything you said, I completely agree with. Yeah, I mean, I think, some of my favorite artists in general, and I know I've talked about this on the podcast so many times, but it's people who find their unique genius in whatever way and facet that may be. It may be through like being a naive painter and continuing that process, but you always carry that sort of childlike sensibility, or it's someone who's classically trained and then at some point broke out of that and said, no, fuck this. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to, I need to explore deeper into like who I am cerebrally and intellectually and those sort of things, and find myself again through these techniques. So it's like, I mean, essentially techniques are just a toolbox,
right? Yeah,
you can, maybe you just have a hammer in that toolbox, or maybe you have 40 different tools to be able to utilize, but it's because everyone has their own point of view on things, their own interpretations, their own observations, their own experiences, good and bad, and all of those things. And then I think at the end of the day, it's like a true artist. And this can be at any level, because I feel like an artist is also just about the feeling and utilizing those feelings into mediums, Yeah. So at the end of the day, I mean, it's an expression, it's you expressing yourself through whatever tools you have.
Right. Because that's the only time you can really do something unique. It's when you allow yourself to be yourself through your work.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm struggling with right now, because I'm trying to make work that's more personal, because I primarily have done a lot of street photography and travel photography. And I was recently in Japan in December, and I shot a lot of photographs there. It was my first time there. And I created photographs that are good photographs, but I don't think that those images aptly captured my experience in Japan during those 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I was missing from a lot of those, from most of the photographs.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've been recognizing. And I've been working on a couple of personal projects, one which focuses on my wife and I taking care of my mother-in-law, who has early onset Alzheimer's. And so I've been making photographs of that dynamic, that family dynamic in my house. And that led me to do a second project where I'm documenting the morning routines of young families with kids anywhere from newborns to about 12 or 13. Yeah. And for me, those have come from a very sort of personal place in terms of the role of family, intimacy, relationships on both ends, from the beginning to the end. And I'm using all the skills that I ever learned in terms of making photographs on the street when I use these images, but I'm much more invested in what I'm photographing. And there's a third one that I've just started to work on, where I'm just exploring my old neighborhood in South LA. And, all of those images for me are about, can I see myself in my work? And getting away from just making pictures that are technically good, and also just getting away from sort of the practical nature of a lot of my photography over the years, which has been writing about photography, creating books, creating magazine articles, where the images were largely illustrative to explain a concept or something like that. So they were pretty much in service of me making a living as a photographer. Nothing particularly personal. And I find that right now that's where I'm at. And I'm not really the extent by which the personal is just by my choice of subject matter right now. And the work is still too early to really know whether I'm succeeding or not. But I do feel different about it, that it feels different from anything else that I've ever done.
I think that's good.
Yeah. And so I've been feeling for a long time that I needed something different. And the only way I could do it was not by picking up another camera or going off to some new exotic location or anything like that. It was really about making the choice to photograph something that's very, very close to home.
I was listening to your episode 178 where you did a monologue about kind of, certain things that you were going through during that time period. I believe this was in 2013.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Around that time. And you were talking about, some of the things that you found out about different photographers when you were, interviewing them for the podcast, is that they found comfortability and uncomfortability.
Yeah.
And that idea is something that I've been chewing on for the past couple years, just constantly finding being okay with being uncomfortable.
Oh man, that is so important.
Yeah, but I also like in that particular episode how you were describing, things that you've been going through during that time period. You were talking about like sitting at a cubicle and, and how that there's some sort of cognitive dissonance there, and being very vulnerable about just your process as a creative. And I think that those things are very valuable to people. It goes back to the, inundation of information and also, the facade that people put on like through social media and things like that. So I feel like when you can actually express some deep emotional thoughts to other people, that it can really help them, even if it's painful for you to talk about a bit.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I've always been very reluctant to share that personal side of myself with anyone, So, but at some point, I began doing that more and more as an adult, just because I realized there were other people who had experienced similar things, or were feeling similar things, and it just wasn't, in a pocket of isolation. And as I started doing that, I realized that I wanted to talk about it more. And sometimes it would come out through my conversations with people on the show, and I would touch on different ideas with them. But then periodically I just decided that, I just wanted to share it with people. And I would often get the most reactions from those episodes as opposed to a lot of the other episodes that I did, which kind of surprised me, but it made me realize that there are a lot of people that feel the same way. And so I periodically have put more of myself out there in interviews as a result, because I think as human beings, we're not all terminally unique. And we like to think that we are. Yeah. And so I think I have the advantage of a microphone and a podcast that reaches thousands of people every week. And if I can help someone sort of gain some encouragement and some solace by knowing that there's someone else out there who has experienced something along the same lines, if not exactly the same experience, that it's part of my responsibility having this sort of medium at my beck and call, that I'd be irresponsible if I wasn't doing it. I think I'd be trying to be somebody I wasn't if I wasn't willing to put myself out there, warts and all, sometimes.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of courage to do that, to put yourself out there and, with, I was going to say not really caring about being judged, but just being able to put yourself out there in such an intimate way,
People will say it's courageous, but part of me felt like, I'm not going to be ashamed of it anymore.
That's good.
I'm not going to be ashamed of the fact that I've felt this way, that I've made bad choices, that I've made mistakes, that I've done stuff that is goddamn embarrassing. So I just don't want that stuff to own me anymore. Yeah. And I think that's a bigger part of it.
For sure.
It's just like speaking it out loud. It's just like, no, I'm not going to be throttled by that anymore. So when I admit, some of the things that I've done, like with my mental health issues and some of the other stuff, for me, it's just like, no, I'm not going to keep this secret. There's no point. It's all this stuff has sort of helped me become the person I am today. So I'm not going to use that as an excuse to be less than who I actually am. And part of it is just being honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that will benefit the work. My willingness to be honest about who I am is going to allow me to be much more honest when I'm creating the work.
Of course.
If I'm being secretive and I'm holding stuff back from myself, then how the hell can I freely express myself in a piece of art? It's just not going to happen. Yeah. It's just going to be end up bullshit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you bring up a pretty interesting, like, psychological thing that I've been thinking about as well. Just this idea that you can actually hide behind your work by not being honest with yourself. But also, I mean, I don't know, maybe you can give me some insight on this. Being an interviewer and interviewing people, you can utilize interviewing to not express certain things about yourself as well, and hide behind being the interviewer and asking the question and not being asked questions back to you.
I think that with interviewing, it's kind of tricky because you're really there in the service of someone else being able to tell their story. But everyone has a relationship with the interviewer because they're listening to their show. So you're basically the medium through which they're communicating. So I think that listeners have to have a sense of trust with the person who's doing the interviewing. And if you're not being yourself, if you're not being honest, if you're being the kind of person that just asks a bunch of series of questions, who doesn't listen and just gets the sort of the traditional empty answers from people, people are not going to listen for any sort of exterior at the time, other than being interested in the guest. But in terms of the sort of long-standing relationship that I've built with people that I've never met, but who have listened to me, I think part of it is that they get the sense that I'm being myself. Because when they hear me and they hear my excitement, when I'm asking a question or I react to someone, that's genuine. When I tell something, go back to this. You just said something that really piques my interest. They hear it in my voice. They know I'm not BSing. They know I'm not working from some sort of script. And people like hearing that. And you can only create that if there's honest genuineness there, if there's an honesty that's there. Otherwise, it's contrived, it's controlled, it's prepackaged. And, going back to what we said before, it's not anything that's going to last the test of time.
I agree. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's also why I liked listening to your conversation, the most recent one with Joel Meyerowitz.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, his work is fantastic.
Oh my God, yeah.
Incredibly fantastic. So that's actually the first episode that I listened to of your podcast when my friend John Wentz introduced me to your podcast. And yeah, I don't know. I found that, I mean, you're talking about just like connecting. And have you ever met Joel?
Yeah, I've met him in person.
Oh, okay. Oh, maybe you said that on the podcast, actually.
Yeah.
But I mean, just, I can tell that, you guys have this mutual respect for each other. And yeah, it felt like some sort of kinship, and it felt like a real human connection. But you're talking about things. Actually, what I found very interesting about that conversation when you guys were talking about Joel, I think he met Richard Avedon. Right. Okay, so you both were talking about Richard Avedon, and Richard Avedon, Joel said that Richard Avedon, he met him and they were talking about getting subjects and how Richard Avedon would basically have his team cast for him.
That's right.
And I was just thinking, like, how interesting is that? It's almost like, and yes, I understand, he's trying to run a successful studio and things like that, but it's very like business oriented as opposed to finding people on the street and connecting with them, spending the time to talk to them. And it seems that's very much Joel's approach. And I mean, both approach is relevant for, various people, but I think I was just fascinated by that because it's interesting because you can look at that. I think it's what's that book called? Richard Avedon's
The
book?
American West.
The American West. So you can look at that book and you see these images and you put your own weight to it. What right. It might, everyone brings a certain amount of experience and understanding, and, you unconsciously or consciously can project what you think about the image. Right. And the images, when I've seen those images, it seems like such a personal connection and very well curated, I guess, in terms of the way the book is presented and things like that. But it's interesting to think that he had them cast, he had a team find these people. And I don't know, it's just two different mindsets on photographing people.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary on Richard Avedon. I forget the title of it. I think it was part of the American Masters series.
I did see part of it. Okay. Yes.
And he has a conversation with one of the women who he photographed who was not happy with the way she appeared in the image. And he impressed on her the idea that this is not your picture. This is my picture. This is not so much about what you look like. It's how I see. It was pretty much he was using her as a mirror for himself.
That very much sounds like the approach that Lucian Freud has.
Okay.
In his paintings.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
I mean, it's essentially that, it's more so about his approach to painting someone. He painted Kate Moss one time.
Okay.
And I think she was pregnant during that time, and she didn't really like the way that she looked. I mean, it's very much similar to that story that you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you have that understanding of how Richard is and the way he saw his photography, then having someone else cast it, you can understand it to some degree, because the people who work for him probably kind of had a sense of what to look for, not so much a particular person or even a particular type, but they kind of understood the sort of rawness that he wanted from his subjects. So when he saw them, he was able to basically shape them in whatever way that he wanted. That's a completely foreign approach to me. Because for me, when I look at somebody, I know that I want to photograph them. There's just something there that I inherently feel.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's yes, I'm in control, but I'm also looking to elicit something from them at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is always hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think just those mindsets of always need to be in control. I mean, you can like equate this back to Stoicism and Taoism and varying philosophies like that. But, you know, just being able to relinquish control during times, I think is interesting. I think the thing about the Avedon thing was really relatable for me because I used to be a commercial photographer and fashion photographer. And then so that sense of control and like manipulating sort of like light and the subject and those sort of things and it also just spoke to who I was as a person back then, you know, always needing to be in control and like those sort of things, you know. And as I get older and more mature and just allowing things to occur, being more malleable and being more appreciative of things and just having a further understanding of life. Do you feel that photography has led to you to similar trains of thought or similar wavelengths?
Yeah, because photography for me is a meditative process. It's one of the few things outside of just genuine meditation that allows me to be completely present, where I don't have the baggage of my past and my anxiety about the future perpetually in my thoughts. When I go out and I make photographs, particularly if I'm making a portrait, it's all about me being in that moment and not really putting any expectations on it. It's looking at everything that's in front of me, the light, the shadow, the line, the shape, the color, gesture, and seeing how I can wrangle all that within the context of the frame and make something that's more than the sum of its parts. And that's for me is the game, that's the dance, that's the challenge. And
they're toying with us.
Yeah. And when I'm able to do that, it's when I feel like I'm living I'm alive when I'm in those moments. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I think that the photographs are quote unquote successful. For me, a day where I've spent photographing, if I felt like I was in that place, that's more important than how many great pictures I got that day. My goal is anytime I go out to shoot is just make one photograph that's unlike anything I would have made before. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't have to be a portfolio image. That just has to be a picture that shows me that I'm made a different choice, that I'm willing to stretch myself. And the only way I can get there is by being completely present. And that's why I work very simply with my camera. I usually have a camera with me all the time, but I have all the settings down, you know, in terms of what I normally need to shoot at. So I'm just focused on observing, taking a look at what's happening. When I see the potential of a scene or a person to provide me a photograph, everything kind of slows down. And I'm looking at every little piece and thinking about, if I shift here, put this in relationship to here, and if they move here, and if the light changes here. And it's like you're looking at the world under a microscope for a moment. And it's just like, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, especially when you just see things slowly coming together. And it does, and you manage to press the button like right at the right time. I get an endorphin rush from it. But it's also, there are two joys. And I think the bigger joy is recognizing the potential of a moment. Right? It's like, oh my God, this could be really good. And then doing all I need to do, and then pressing the button and feeling like I got it. The looking at the image on the computer is sort of like, is not as pleasurable as those two moments. Recognizing the potential, making the moment and feeling like I was there. It's great when I see the print. You know, oh yeah, I got it. But it's like, what do they call, what's the word for that? That the afterwards is not as good as what came before. There's a word.
Well, I mean, it sounds like what you're describing is the actual process of creating the image is more important than the result.
Yeah. Yeah, for me it is, at least for right now.
Yeah.
At least for right now.
It sounds very similar to, and you had her on the podcast, my friend, Michelle Groscott.
Oh, yeah, Michelle's awesome.
She's amazing. She is amazing. I love seeing, I haven't talked to her for a bit, but maybe a year, but I love watching, like, just having a conversation with her, on the street, and she'll be like, wait. Yeah. And just like literally run.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry. There's something
Yes,
there. And I had it, their hands or just whatever might pique her interest at that time. And just seeing that sort of like childlike joy in someone is intoxicating.
And Michelle comes to it so naturally. For me, it's work to get to that point. But yeah, when you see Michelle, even when you're just talking to her, you can just feel that energy right there. She just wants to snatch it out of space. And I love that.
She's so good with connecting with people too. And she I don't know. I mean, she's an incredible person, very, very inspiring person too. So I want to bring it back a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit. So when did you start the podcast, and why did you start the podcast?
I started in 2006, and at the time I was working at Warner Publishing, who published Outdoor Photographer and DP Digital Photo Magazine, and a couple of other publications. And I live in the Pasadena area and worked down in Westwood. So that was like an hour to get to work, an hour and a half to get back.
Yeah.
So just to pass the time, I'd gone through listening to terrestrial radio, and then I started listening to books on tape. And the year before, I discovered podcasts, 2005. And I immediately gravitated to the shows about photography, but a lot of them just focused on technique and equipment. And in my role as an editor for the magazine, I was, up to my eyes in that stuff, writing my upteenth article on tripod selection. So I really wasn't.
That sounds fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, let's just be honest. Tripods. I mean, there's so many different nuances. Tripods,
filters, and too much. And so there wasn't anything along the lines of what I ended up creating, which is conversations about being creative, about photography, but not about equipment, not about how to. And the idea just popped into my head, and I knew all these photographers as a result of working in the industry for, at that point, had been 16 years, because before then I worked at Nikon for about 8 years before I jumped over to the magazine. And I knew I had access to people, and I just needed to learn how to record an interview, how to edit it, how to create a podcast. And it was one of the few things in my life that I knew if I did, it would be successful. I didn't have a definition for what that success would be. I just knew that there would be an audience for it. And basically, I wanted to create a show that I would want to listen to. And so that's 14 years later, I'm still doing it.
That is so crazy. Yeah, those were the very beginning of podcasting, right? When did podcasting start?
Well, that's debatable. But I think it's the first rise of it to any sort of really prominence was probably 2004, maybe late 2003. Mm-hmm. But I think it was pretty early on, because I know the other photo podcasts, which are Chris Marquardt from Tips from the Top Floor, Martin Bailey for the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast, and Jeff Curto's The History of Photography, started 2004. There were other shows that were out there, but I'm not sure when they started. So I think probably 2003 at the earliest. But yeah, they were, shows started popping up around 2004, and they were really niche shows. I mean, just really weird stuff people were putting out there. There was some Dawn and Drew were a couple out of the Midwest who were just talking about their relationship, and they were just like these nobodies from somewhere, and they had a huge audience early on, and it was just like, they were this tattooed young couple out in Minnesota somewhere, and at a ranch or a farm somewhere, and they would just sit down there and talk about their relationship, and it was just like, it was unlike anything else that you'd kind of heard there.
And it was a photography podcast?
No, it was just a couple who would just took up podcasting, and they just started yapping.
Oh, interesting.
And I think it was really fascinating that it wasn't sort of the filtered, packaged sort of content that you were seeing and hearing everywhere else. Mm-hmm. It was just genuine people picking up a mic that you could all of a sudden listen into their lives. Yeah. So, which was like, oh, this is kind of fun. Mm-hmm. And luckily I got into it when I did, because there were no There was nothing to compare myself to. So I didn't feel the insecurity that I might normally feel with other things, because like there's no one else doing this. So I can't feel like I'm doing something right or I'm doing something wrong. I'm just doing what I need to do in order to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to just speaking about the technicalities of photography and photography magazines and photography journaling, being a journalist in the spectrum of photography, I think a lot of people just ask how and not why. But a lot of the times in our educational system, it's about how do you do this how do you solve this problem with math, or how is a sentence constructed technically, what is grammatically correct. I'm curious, like, what are some of the big lessons that you've learned from doing 14 years of podcasting and interviewing all those photographers?
It doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect. They can be flaws. They can be mistakes. You always have do-overs. My recent interview with someone, I screwed up, and so I lost like 3/4 of the interview. And it's like, I'm going to have to ask him to do it again, which is not going to be the first time. But I didn't feel bad. I felt like, that was stupid. I should have formatted the card, and I didn't format the card, so it ran out of space, and so it couldn't save the file, and it was a dumb mistake. But it was just like, well, I'll do it again.
Yeah,
and I think that's it. And I think that the whole point that you made in terms of the how-to is this idea that a lot of people, when they start exploring being creative on a really serious basis, they get caught up with not doing it wrong. And so they invest so much time on learning to do it right. They always ask, what are the rules? Is this okay? Am I breaking the rules by doing this or that? And it's like, no, you learning the skill set is not about you learning to follow the rules. It's about you finding a way to express yourself. That's it. Once you've got up the basic fundamentals of being able to create the work, just create the work and know that there's no mistake. There may be less than technically appropriate or perfect, whatever the word people want to use. But sometimes those mistakes make the work. I look at so many pictures as part of just what I do, and I see pictures that are technically flawless, well exposed, printed beautifully, and I don't feel a damn thing. Mm-hmm. And then I'll see other photographs that are slightly out of focus, the horizon's off a little bit, and I love the photograph. It makes me feel something. So it's, for me, ultimately, it's you just need to learn enough. Mm-hmm. Like Jay Maisel, you start asking him about, camera stuff, he'll just laugh at you. I don't know a goddamn thing about cameras. I just take pictures.
Yeah.
Right? Because he knows enough about his camera to make the photograph. That's it.
Yeah.
And granted, with other fields, you need to be much more knowledgeable of technique. I mean, you put a paintbrush and oils in front of me, I'll make a lovely mess that I probably like the way it looks like. Whether it has any sort of little substance other than me just like, just barfing paint on a canvas, I can't tell you. Would I have fun doing it? Probably so.
Yeah.
But whether or not, I'd be able to create something that people would feel something from, I don't know. My cousin John Perello is a famous painter out of Paris, started off as a graffiti artist. And watching him work is just amazing because he's always working on multiple canvases at the same time, moving, he was doing some stuff where he had these, those long tubes, cardboard tubes that you put paintings in. He had 2 of those tubes extended on his arm and then these sponges at the large end. He was dipping the sponges into the paint and with his sort of extended arms painting on the material that was on the floor. And I looked at that and I'm going, anyone who thinks about painting traditionally would look at that and going, what the hell is he doing? That's not right. Don't you need a brush and an upright canvas in order to make work?
Yeah.
And he's just like there doing his thing. And I've seen him work countless times. And for me, it's just like, it's really sort of magical. It's not so much how he's doing it, right? He's breaking a bunch of rules that I think that a lot of art teachers in a class would just like have a heart attack over. But he's creating work that you look at and you just go, wow. And it's not just the fact that his paintings go for, tens of thousands of dollars. It's not that monetarily they're valuable paintings. It's that he's creating work that is just an extension of him. And you feel it when you take a look at the work.
I guess this draws us back to that trust and honesty, having trust in ourselves and being honest with ourselves. And it sounds like your cousin is tapping into just his own flow and his own fluidity, but also allowing himself to ingrain the process of being okay with failure. And also tapping into that subconscious mind where you don't even think about exactly what you're doing, but you're creating. And through that movement, you can, and with a painting too, you can always, when I interview some painters that, especially painters I really like, they tell me, I don't actually know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But they do know what they're doing. They're like, I'm just pushing around paint. I'm just pushing around paint. And, through all these years of technical studies and things and being able to express things, they eventually come to a conclusion. It's kind of like, if you're a poet, but you only know one word in English, you're not going to really get too far, right? But if you have a huge vocabulary to draw from and pull from, and that's same with experiences.
Yeah.
Being able to constantly learn rules and break rules and learn rules and break rules. I think that's integral to the creative process, is to be okay with that.
Yeah. It's kind of like in terms of photography, it's not so much that you own a 28 millimeter lens as you know what it's capable of doing for you. And I think that most people just buy the 28 or whatever lens or camera thinking that that's going to do it for them. No, it's not. It's knowing what that choice provides you and how you can express yourself differently as a result of that investment in that glass. And that's where the information becomes valuable. People say, "Oh, well, you can't make a portrait with a 28 millimeter lens." It's like, well, bullshit. You can make a portrait with a 28 millimeter lens. You just have to take other things into consideration, including the distortion that happens if you try to shoot a portrait at 3 inches away from that person's face.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, my one of my friends, they shot an entire documentary. It's called Florida Man. It's directed by Sean Dunn, and my friend Isaac Bauman DP'd it, and they shot the whole thing on 16 millimeter lens.
Wow.
So they were shooting their subjects literally this close, like maybe a couple inches from their face.
Okay.
And are you familiar with the idea of the Florida Man?
No. So I think I've heard. Tell me.
Yeah, it's basically the subculture in Florida of it's kind of like the seedy underbelly of Florida, and there's a lot of memes and a lot of just news articles about like the Florida Man, and it's kind of like its own subculture in itself. Okay. It's really like the Florida Man, like consuming bath salts and like ripping his skin off and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I'll have to watch this.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'll send it to you. I think you'll like it. What continually draws you back to photography?
It's probably a cliche to answer, but it's the only thing I know how to do. Really. I can write, but I find that it's so much easier for me to express myself in using a camera than it is with words. With words, it's so much more laborious. It's hard for me to get past my filter when I'm putting words on a page. It's like it's like this thick material stands between me and the words on the page when I'm sitting down to write. And I don't find that happening with photography.
You know what I found? This is just like for myself and my own personal writing process that really helped me with that in terms of allowing yourself to be unfiltered is writing when you immediately wake up.
Oh.
Just having the notepad or the laptop right next to your bed.
Yeah.
And just going straight pen to paper, and just like as you're coming into your senses and consciousness, you don't even brush your teeth or make coffee yet. Just going and just writing. Don't even think about like the grammatical correctness or any of that, but just write and write and write, and then. But this is for me, and this is very much my approach to photography too. It's like trying to tap into that subconscious mind where it's just like you react to the moment.
Yeah.
And allow yourself to be tapped in at that moment and finding ways to strategically like know this about yourself enough, the way you process information. But that helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if it's an essay or something like that, it's a little easier because I'm writing about an idea. I think I struggle more when it comes to writing my fiction. You know, I was doing a lot of fiction at one point. I was kind of pulled back from that for a long time now, though I keep wanting to return to it. And I think part of it is just that, you know, my resistance on being really honest with the words. I think that's part of where it is.
I see.
I get a little bit too caught up on how the words read, even though I know it's a shitty first draft. You know, it's just what it is. I think sometimes that why I resist it is because I feel more vulnerable because it's ink on a page than I do with a photograph. I think that part of, as a photographer, is that I'm using things outside of me in order to reveal something about myself. And I think that when it comes to the words, I don't have that protection anymore. It's like my words are me at that moment. I mean, I haven't really thought about it. I'm constantly obsessed about it because I keep thinking about it. And I do a lot of writing a diary. What's another word for it? It's not diary.
Like journaling?
Journaling. I do a lot of journaling.
Me too.
And so I just do a lot of journaling there. But in terms of building that up into something more, every time I start thinking about doing that or start doing it, I find I just go to a different place that isn't, you know, something. That's bullshit. I think it's what we talked about before. I've not, with my writing, I have not gotten comfortable with the discomfort. That's what it is. That's what it is. It's uncomfortable to be in that place when I'm writing. And the only way I'm going to get through that is being okay with the discomfort.
Yeah.
And I've been able to do that with the photography. I've been able to do that with the podcasting. But the writing, I've not given myself permission to do that. So that's probably as honest an answer as I can give. It's just like it's very uncomfortable to be in that place, and I don't like being there. Either I have to give up the idea that I'm going to do that, so I stop, you know, self-flagellating about it, or make the choice to be uncomfortable for whatever amount of time that I need to be in order to make it happen. I mean, that's the choice for any creative. It's like, okay, you're either going to make it or you're not. You know, don't bitch, don't moan, don't self-punish yourself. Either make the goddamn work or don't. You know, don't make it anymore because it's your life, my life. I don't have to do anything.
Yeah. I mean, that's some really sound advice. I was going to ask as a final question, actually, but I generally ask this at the end of each podcast. But do you have any advice for creatives and artists? Any sort of advice?
I don't want to give a bullshit answer to that because I think it's an important question. And I think that for me, if I had any advice to anyone, is find people with whom you can create a creative community of people that you trust, not people who are doing the same thing you're doing. I think there's a big distinction between those kinds of groups. There are a lot of people who will gravitate to other people who are doing the same thing that they're doing, whether it's photography or painting or whatever, just because they just want to be in a like-minded tribe. But a lot of those people may not have your best interest in mind, and they may not be the kind of people that can lift you up or challenge you in the way that you need to be challenged. If you're going to, and you have to create your own community. You can't just sort of join something that exists that's been created by somebody else because they had their own reasons for creating that group. But and it doesn't have to be big. It can be 3 or 4 people who you feel like they have something that I want, and we're all willing to share together to grow and to get better at what we do. So I think that's as good of advice as I can give today.
Thank you so much for your time, man. Seriously.
Hey, man. Thanks
this
for
is
having
a
me.
great conversation, and I'm elated to have you.
I appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, man. All right, cool. Thanks. Music for the podcast is by Rarebit, a.k.a. Justin Dosher Hopkins. Creative producer is Kelly Kekich, and editing help by Matthew A. Paul.